Welcome back. What we will now be doing is looking at advanced features of graphical mapping. We will be looking at over the next two sessions, we will be looking at doing a deep dive into graphical mapping or the message mapping and trying to understand all the various features that it provides. The first thing that we would like to call out about the graphical mapping or message mapping is that graphical mapping and message mapping provides a lot of standard functions to do different types of features. For example, in the first scenario that we had built, the file to file scenario, let's have a look at it. Close all. If I go to our file to file scenario, this is the scenario that I'm talking about, the file to file scenario. Let's open up the mapping, right? There were a couple of things that we did in this file to file scenario, right? The first thing that we had done was in the name function, we had done a concatenation of first name and last name, and that was a part of the text function, right? A concatenation is a part of a text function. So similarly, there are multiple other text functions that SAP provides that will enable you to perform text manipulation, substring, right? If you want to know what each function does, there is a tooltip that SAP provides that will enable you to read it. Because of the recording, the tooltip is not getting displayed perfectly. If we go into edit mode, I think it should, yeah. No, it does not. Okay, but the idea of you can go through the the documentation on help.sap for each of them, but the idea is SAP provides quite a few standard functions for text manipulation. Likewise, there are multiple other categories of function. Let's look at a few of them. Arithmetic, right? Arithmetic enables you to add two numbers. Subtract enables you to subtract the second value from the first value. Equals will return if two float numbers are equal, else they are false. Will return the ABS will return the absolute value of numbers. So likewise, there are multiple arithmetic functions where you can get the max, you can get the min of a number, you can get the ceil, you can get the floor, format number, where you can do number formatting using Java number formatting. So the SAP provides a lot of arithmetic functions where you can do arithmetic operations on your numbers. Boolean is if you want to do if you want to do if function, else function, if without else, and functions, or functions, and so on are a part of the Boolean functions. Text, we already saw concat, there is substring, there is equals, index, last index, compare, replace string, and so on, right? Then you have conversions. We will look at conversions in detail, so we are not going into that. Date transformation, if you remember, we use the date transformation function here. So I can do a var list, use list, where we have translated the date from one format to the other format. The thing to notice about functions is whenever there's a star like this, it means there's a property required. So you can double click it and you can look at the properties, right? You can see that the date transformation that we had was transforming date from one format to the other. So likewise, you have current date. If you want the current system date, you can get the current date. You can define what format you want the current date in. If you want date before, date after, comparison of dates, all of that is supported. Then we looked at constants. We will look at this in detail as well. Constants, we've already used constants definitely. Copy values used to take the one particular value from if there are three values, you can always say take the 0th value, take the first value, and so on, right? Sender is used to identify who's the sender system. Receiver is used to identify who's the receiver system. So if I say sender here, in the runtime, it will say BS file system 00. If I say receiver, it will take the receiver business system or business component and provide the data here, okay? So, and the last set of functions, two other functions are node functions. We'll look at node functions a little in default, in detail, and statistic functions are sum, average, count, and index. So the basic idea of PI is that the standard mapping of PI provides you with a lot of standard functions, okay? But having said that, like everywhere else in the world, standard is not always enough. You need customizations. So what SAP also provides you is it enables you to extend the functionality of your graphical mapping by enabling you to write user-defined functions if you would like to write user-defined functions in Java. Okay, user-defined functions are extensions to your graphical mapping that are written within your message mapping. They are used just like standard function. They are only visible within the software component and the mapping in which it is created. Okay, there are two different types of user-defined function. One is a simple function and one is an advanced function. Okay, a simple function, what does it do? A simple function processes each input as an individual input and makes a corresponding call, and it will always return a string. Okay, when I say it will always return a value. There's only an input. A simple function will take one input and one output per argument. We will look at it and that will explain it a little better. Advanced function, as the name implies, are used for even more advanced functionalities. Advanced function can deal with arrays. The easiest way to remember the difference between simple functions and advanced functions is, if you want to either take an input as an array, or if you want to take an input, then you use an advanced function. If you want to take an input as an individual value, then you take it as a simple function. Same way, if you want your output to be an advanced an array, then you have to have, if the output of your UDF has to be multiple values, then it becomes an advanced function, else it becomes a simple function. Okay, let's look at an example, right? Let's look at what a simple function, another comparison of a simple function and an advanced function. In this case, the simple function will take an input as a string. You can have multiple input parameters, but each of them are of type string, whereas in the case of an advanced function, the output is of type results list, and you will have multiple types of string. I think this is best explained with an example, so let's just get started with an example. Okay, now let's take this first function, right? Let's assume that PI does not provide a concatenate function, right? Rather, let's look at something else. Okay, let's assume that PI does not provide a before PI can process this message. There is a let's look at the execution. Sorry, I think now I get it. So let's look at the execution, and here we see we have John Doe and we have Jane Doe. Now, what if the requirement is make sure that both the first name and the last name are in uppercase, right? Then typically what you would do is you would go into text functions, because now you're going to do text function, and you will see if there is a built-in function. Yes, there is a built-in function, right? Voila. So what I'll do, there's a built-in function called to uppercase, so I will drag it here, put it here, okay, align it, and then save my mapping. So now when I execute my mapping, at least the first name should now be in, the first name has now become in uppercase. But for our ease to explain a user-defined function, let's assume that PI does not provide a function for uppercase, and now we need to write a custom user-defined function to create an uppercase, right? So let's expand this mapping, pop the mapping out, close this so that we have more real estate space in the screen. Now I'm going to click on this create button. Okay, so click on this button. Here you see, click on this create button here. When you click on this create button, you will be able to now define your new user-defined function. So let's call it UDF underscore to uppercase, right? This is the name of my UDF, the name and the title. So if you see, let me cancel it. So when I do a cancel, nothing is displayed here. Now let's press create one more time. And when I say create, do you see local.title, right? So let's create a name and give the name for this as UDF.to uppercase. The title also, let's give it the same name. And when I change the title, do you see the title changes? So exactly. Title is just a title to be displayed here in the editor, whereas name is the name. In my case, my recommendation is always to have the same name and title, right? And then let's give a description. Let's say UDF to convert input string to a uppercase. Okay. Execution type, let it be single values. A simple user-defined function will always have single values. Okay. Category is always user-defined function, and here you don't need to create a new category. Let's just call it as user-defined, and here you call this as, give a name, right? I'm going to call this the input string, the variable name, the input variable, I'm calling it as a input string, and then say create. Okay. Now when you say create function, you get a signature for this function, right? Look at it, public string. So this user-defined function returns a string and it takes an input as a string, right? So let's say string output string equal to empty, output string equal to input string dot to uppercase. So this is a standard Java function to convert a string to uppercase, and I will say return output string. So with this my coding is done. Okay, what I've done, I've declared a string called output string, then I'm saying this output string is nothing but input string dot to uppercase. The input string is my input, and then I'm returning this output string. The reason I have to return is this particular user defined function expects me to return a variable. So with this I close it, and now how do I use this user defined function, right? Let's go somewhere else. Let's do this. So now if you see there's a new category called user defined, select that user defined function, drag it here and drop it here. Okay, now that you've dragged and dropped, let's use this, map the first name here and map the last name here, right? Perfect. Same way, let's do it for the last name. Next, I map the input here. So the last name is the input to this user defined function, and the output is the input to the concatenate function, right? And now let's save our mapping. What is this? The length of the array startup functions is not equal to the number of functions. See error log for details. So let's look at that, right? Something is wrong with our declaration, so let's have a look at our declaration. Okay, here as well we need to give a title. I think that's the reason. So let's go ahead and put a title here and say okay, close, save. That's not working it, that's not helping. And let's look at the description. I think there's a space restriction for the description, so I'm going to just select this and I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to argument input string close, return output string. Okay, input string dot to uppercase, say close, save. Okay, so let's do one thing first. I'll remove the usage and save, and then do a check. Delete, save. Alright, there's something definitely wrong with my user defined functions. So I'm going to try to delete it and recreate it. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, delete function. I've deleted the function, and I'm saving my mapping. Alright, let's do it one more time. Okay, I'm going to call it get. Let's change the naming convention. So let's say to uppercase underscore UDF to uppercase, right? Let's call it that. I'll give the same name here, and I'll give the same name here. And here in my argument, I'm going to call this as input string, and I'll say create function. Okay, I'll just for now say return. I just want to see if my issue is resolved. Say close. I will fix the code later. Yeah, now we don't have an issue. I think it was the naming convention. There are certain restrictions on the naming convention that is documented in the help.sap. So let's go ahead. I'll call string output string equal to empty. Then I will say output string equal to input string dot to uppercase. Okay, and I will say return output string. I'll say close, and I'll save. Alright, now I'm going to use this user defined function. I'll just use it for the first name for once. Let's test it with the first name before we use it for the last name. Alright, and I'll align my text and I'll save it. And now I'm going to execute my mapping. I've executed my mapping, and once my executed, my first name is now converted into uppercase. So now let's drag this again and do it for the last name. Alright, let's do that. Now let's execute it again. It's executed, and let's expand it. Both the first name and the last name now are in uppercase, exactly what we wanted. Okay, so now we've written a simple user defined function. Now let's look at a use case for a advanced user defined function. What if the requirement is the qualifications that we are putting here has to be comma separated. So rather than giving BTech, MS and so on, the requirement is BTech, the qualification, if there are multiple qualifications in the input, it should be BTech, MS. They are comma separated rather than being created multiple times, right? How do I handle it, right? So let's go ahead, and what I mean is my output should be something like this: BTech, MS and so on. So let's go ahead and write a user defined function for that, right? So I'm going to create a new function and I'm going to call it UDF to concat to UDF, sorry, I'll cancel. So again, let's click on create and call UDF qualification. I'll copy the name and put the same name here as well. Okay, same thing for description. And now the execution type will have to change from single values to all values of a context. Okay, change the execution type from single values to all values of a context. Now when you change that, you will see some changes down. Okay, first thing you're seeing is the input is argument. Let's again call it input let's call it input qualification. The input argument is input qualification, and the output, there's no output string. There's something that's called result, so we will not change anything about that. Now the input can be of type string, int or float. Let it all be string. We will look at the difference between all values of a context and queue subsequently once we are done with this, right? So let's go ahead and say create function. Now look at the signature. The user defined function does not return anything. It's saying void. So an advanced user defined function is not going to return a string. Rather, whatever is the output, you have to put it into this array of type result. Okay, and the input becomes a string array. Instead of being a string, an individual value, it's going to take an entire context and give it as an array. So now let's loop through this array for int I equal to 0, I less than input qualification, dot length dot length and I plus plus, right? I'm going to loop through this, so I'll open and close my this here. Now I'm going to call string output qualification equal to empty, right? Now I go into the end and I go here, I'll say output qualification. Remember, we need to comma separated, so I'm going to say output qualification is equal to output qualification plus a comma separated input qualification of I. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to say result dot add value. So this is all standard functions, so do not worry, there are slides around it. Once we are done with it, I'll walk you through that. Okay, I'm just going to say result dot add value. This result is nothing but the output result list that we said, result dot add value, and say output qualification. Okay, so now you're done with coding the second UDF. So now let's go to this mapping for qualifications, remove this mapping here, okay, and then just map details to UDF qualifications and qualifications, right, and save your mapping. Let's go ahead now, execute, and then I will explain what we just did. Okay, there's a problem. It says input qualification dot, okay, I've done input qualification of length. There's an obvious user coding issue, so let's go ahead, edit function. Sorry, it should just be input qualification of I. Okay, all right, close, save. So the code change that I did, let me just show the code again. So if you are following along with me, I just made a change where I'm telling input qualification of I. Okay, now let's go into test mode and execute. All right, so the execution is done, and let's see the output. Excellent, right? There's one issue, but then overall if you see, it becomes BTech and EMS, but there's an extra comma at the end, which means for the first value we do not want a comma, right? So let's just enhance our UDF quickly. We will say, hey, let's do it like this. If I equal to 0, else okay, if I equal to 0, what I'm going to say, output qualification is equal to input qualification of I, right? So this code will make sure that that extra comma is not there. So now let's execute it one more time and then see what happens. Let's just fix our code. Perfect. I expand this. BTech MS ports. Excellent. So what just happened, right? So right click, let's do one thing. Right click on the details, say display queue. Right click on the details and say display queue. So what's happened? You have BTech and MS, because look at it, right? If you look at my payload, the first employee has 2 qualifications, whereas the second employee has only 1 qualification. So you have BTech and MS, and then you have something called sports, right, for the second employee. So what this is, BTech and MS is one context, sports is another context. This is what we mean by context. So I'm just using the numbering. The first, null just indicates that it is the beginning of a context. Then you have 2 values, BTech and MS. Let's expand this. So you have BTech and MS under one context, and the context is that of employee details. So under the employee details have BTech and MS, and the sports, then there's a context change that is indicated by this gray, that there is a context change, there's a change, and then you have sports, and that there's only one sports, and then again there's a context change to indicate that it is the end, right? So this is the first input. So how did we do this? I right click on the details and I say display queue. Right, now that is done. So what does happen to the UDF? Right click on the details, say display queue. Right. So again, the UDF, first time it get executed, it had 2 inputs, BTech, and the entire array was passed containing BTech and MS, and then that got separated here, and that got comma separated, and the next time it got executed, only one value was there, sports, and that got executed here. Now let's do one thing. Let's change our UDF. If you remember, and go into edit function and click on this edit pencil symbol. Instead of all values of a context, let's change it to all values of a queue and see what happens, right? Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and execute. I'm going to expand. Okay, we see BTech, we see MS, and then we see some weird thing, and then we see sports. __ CC, context change. Whereas the employee info is wrong. So what just happened, right? So when I say all values of a queue, I say display queue. This entire queue is passed to the UDF. So the user defined function is now getting executed only once. Whereas when you told all values, when the input was, when I go here, instead of all values of a queue, I told all values of a context, the user defined function gets executed twice. And that is the difference between a context and a queue. When you say all values of a context, only the values within a context will be passed. It will be passed as an array, of course. Whereas in the case of a queue, it will be passed, the entire queue is passed, and you are supposed to handle all the context changes that occur. Okay. With this, we are done with building a standard user-defined, a simple user-defined function, and an advanced user-defined function. So let's have a look at what else is there, right? In terms of the theory piece portion to it. The result list object enables you to add value, enables you to add a context change. So if you want to add a context change, you can explicitly add a context change. You can add a suppress if you want. You can clear the entire result list if you want. There is another way to do it. Instead of saying dot add value, you can just say result list dot cc and result list dot suppress. Okay. The container object also enables you to access multiple things. What do we mean by container object? If you go to your user defined function and say edit function, you see there's something called container. It will be there for both the functions. What is this container, right? The container enables you to access multiple parameters. It enables you to set trace statements. It enables you to access global containers and so on. So now we will look at an example of setting trace statements within your user defined function. So how do we add trace statements to our user defined functions, right? So let's go ahead and edit our function, user defined functions, and add a trace statements, right? I'm going to get my trace object. So I'm going to say abstract trace equal to container dot get trace. Okay, so I'm saying abstract trace is equal to container dot get trace, and now I'm saying trace dot add warning, and I'm going to add a warning that says UDF to uppercase has been called, right? Next I'm going to just copy this. Sorry, I won't copy it. I'll just go ahead and say trace dot add info message instead of a warning. Now I'm saying add info, and I'll say here, let me call it as warning colon, I'll say info colon UDF has finished concat, and I will add the output string. Okay, so same way, let's go into the next user defined function, the qualification user defined function, and say abstract trace equal to, again the same thing that we did in the previous statement. I'm getting the container, using the container object, I'm getting access to the trace statement, and I'm saying trace dot add warning input qualification UDF called, and I'll say warning. Okay, any string is okay. All right, so let's go ahead, save our mapping and execute our mapping. Right now, when I execute our mapping, you'll see something. You start seeing the trace and the warning statements here. You see this warning UDF has been called, and this is an info. UDF has finished concat, or sorry, we were not doing concat, we were doing uppercase concat of John Doe, Jane Doe. So my UDF is done, and then input qualification UDF was called, and so on. All right, so let's go ahead, just quickly change the text. I want to fix the text, edit function, and let's just take the text that say has finished uppercase conversion. All right, now I'm going to save my mapping, and I'm executing my mapping. Oh sorry, I did a refresh, which is wrong. I'm going to go into mapping and activate my mapping, and now that my mapping is activated, let's take the input message, input payload, and go here into my file to file and just make sure that the data is okay. So I'm going to my file to file data, which is here, edit, and I'll save my file to file. Now I'm going to go ahead and upload my file. Right, I'm going to cg3z I'll say file to file.xml, and out here I will again say file to file.xml, and I'll upload the file. So now when I've uploaded the file, let's go into communication channel monitor and just open my communication channel. So what is my communication channel? I go into my file to file scenario, and here this is my sender channel. I just want to speeden things up a little. So I'm going into my communication channel, I'm selecting my sender channel, I'm saying go. Okay, my session has expired, so I'm going to close. I'm going to configuration and monitoring home. I'm going to adapter engine, communication channel monitor, and go here, execute, and my file just got picked up. So next I'm going into SXMB underscore moni, monitor for processed XML messages, execute, and this is my message, and test failed. It says parameter ID for interface is missing. Okay, hold on, and this is because I was trying something. I know why this is. I was trying something in my operation mapping, so I've just got to make a quick change here. Just give me a second. This is an error that came for no reason. You can ignore this, and you can come here. Okay, I've got to go into my interface determination. Alright, I'm going to go into my interface determination. I'm going to make a change, and I'm going to activate it. We'll come to this in the next session. I was just trying something offline, and that's caused this issue. So nothing to worry, you should not face this issue. And now I'm going to go ahead and execute the mapping again and see if this solves the problem. So I'm going to refresh. Parameter contains ID for interface mapping. Okay. All right, here I have to go here. Okay, I'll just reactivate the operation mapping and activate it, done. All right, this is my file to file scenario. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly delete it and recreate this object. Again, this is not something you should be doing. This is because I was trying something and that has gotten some issues here. So I'm going into BS file system. I'm just going to recreate my receive interface determination and say new specific. And I'm going to select my mapping. And now let's go ahead and activate my change. And once I activate it, let me go ahead and upload my file. My file is uploaded. Let me go ahead, stop my channel, start my channel, and hopefully now that issue doesn't occur. Refresh, and yeah. So this was, you can ignore the previous error. That was not something that we were expecting. That is something that we will see in the next session. Now we know what the mapping was going to do. It's going to do an uppercase, and it separated it this way. So we've still not fixed the user-defined function. You see BTech MSCC Sport. So let's go ahead. It is all the user-defined function is showing it as all context of a queue instead of all context of a value. So it is showing all values of a queue. I'm going to just change it to all values of a context. Save. Activate your mapping. Activated my mapping. And now I'm going to upload my file again. Upload. My map file is uploaded. I'm going to stop my channel and start my channel. Start my channel. And now let's go ahead and look at the trace. Right? Refresh. Perfect. Let's make sure our output is okay. Technical routing, payload. My output is looking good. Now where do I see the trace statement? You see this trace in the response. Let's double click this trace and then go to scroll all the way to the bottom, and somewhere you will see mapping. You can see mapping. You can always search for Control F and say mapping. mapping, and you will see your mapping execution starting, and you say mapping is defined, you see the mapping is getting executed, and then if you keep coming down, you see this warning, UDF has been called, info, John has converted, warning. So basically, both your warning and your info statements are getting printed. And so you can see all the warning and the info statement that get printed within your trace statements. Okay, just go into the trace, and out here you should be able to see the trace. Now let me go ahead and reduce the level of trace, right? So before that, let me show you what levels of trace that are there, right? Okay, if you see, we had used add warning and add info. Add warning is displayed when trace level is set to 1, 2 and 3. Add info is displayed when the trace level is set to 2 and 3. Add debug message is only displayed when the trace level is set to 3. In our case, we are able to see, if I go into the trace, you can see level 3 is there, level 1 is there, everything is there, right? So let's go ahead and make a change to make the trace as level 1 instead of level 3. So how do we do that? Go to transaction sxmb underscore ADM. I'll repeat sxmb underscore ADM. Go to this transaction, and once you come to this transaction, go to integration engine configuration, specific, and go to this change configuration, and then again go into a change mode, and then set the trace level. If you see the trace level, current value is set to 3. Change it to 1 and then save. Okay, next exit. Now let's upload my file, and I'm going to go ahead and stop my communication channel and start my communication channel and go back to my Moni, sxmb underscore Moni, monitoring screen, refresh. Now this is the latest message, and if I go to the trace now, only trace level 1 is seen because we made a change to reduce the amount of trace that is being written. Now let's search for mapping, right? If you know the name of your operation mapping, we know that it starts with OM underscore. So let's search for OM underscore. Yeah, we go. Interface mapping is executed, and now you see warning UDF is called, the info statement is missing. And the reason the info statement is not printed is because the trace level has been set to 1. So the idea of writing trace statements and debug statements is in your mapping, you can write multiple layers of statements. Add warning will be displayed always irrespective of what the trace level is. The minimum trace level is 1 and the maximum is 3. Add info is displayed for 2 and 3. Add debug is only set for 3. So you can always, when you're writing your code, write different levels of trace statements and then enable the trace and then monitor it in PI to understand what is going on. Okay.